to Tech Tuesday. This edition is on Excel formatting and pivot tables. My name is Tom Levine, and I am Cornerstone's tech guru. Just so we know before we get started, I did do an additional Excel Tech Tuesday a little while ago. That was actually covering the basics of Excel and things such as formula entry, VLOOKUPs, how to do a side-by-side comparison in Excel, and those types of things. So I won't be covering formulas in full or any other basic Excel knowledge today. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them, but I might just refer you back to that first presentation. If you have any questions, still don't hesitate to ask. Today we'll be covering pivot tables and formatting in Excel. Formatting is very important that we cover before we do pivot tables, because if you don't format things properly in your base data, then not necessarily going to convert well over to a pivot table. Sometimes if you store a number as a text, then it won't register it as a number even if you use the sum function. So it's very important that you make sure things are formatted properly. In addition, I know that it bothers me whenever I type out a date and Excel changes that into a different format. So I thought that formats might be a good thing to cover. Beginning with formatting, we're actually going to start with dates. As you can see, as I scroll through, we have some dates listed here in this renewal date column of this data. And the reason for that is I wanted to show you the difference between a typed-in date and a stored date in Excel. I'm going to go up to this little bar here, which is the formatting bar. And if you click on this drop-down, it shows all the different general types of things you can convert into. You could use text, scientific notation, which is mostly used for very long numbers, fractions, percentages, even exact timestamps. But this should all be formatted as a short date. And that's what it looks like over here. It has the month, the day, and the year, all typed up neatly. However, if I change this into general format, general is what Excel uses to store general information. It could be a number, it could be a string of letters and text, it could be anything you want it to be. And as you see, some of our dates have changed into strings of numbers. Specifically, we have the one for Pitcock Cami and Zhuang Ron. That's because Excel actually has these stored as their numerical date value. Excel stores things as strings of numbers, and the same goes with dates, especially because it's easy to change through date formats if it's stored as a number. For instance, if I changed it into long date format, all of the rows that were numbers have changed into their long date formats, which is the day, the full date with month spelled out, and the year. However, none of the other ones that are simply typed in numbers in general format have changed. The way to convert this, if you want to be able to freely manipulate your dates, is to actually use a formula. This formula is called value. And what it does is it converts a string that represents a number into a number. For instance, it will convert our date into a stored date format. Format that is general so you can see. If we double click on the bottom right hand side of our screen, that extends the string all the way down through. And we see that it's all stored as a string now. In addition, if I wanted to say convert it to long date, I could now that it's stored as that number format. In addition to just general date formats, there's another format you can use, which is text. As you can see here, this formula I have typed is not actually doing anything. And that's because I've formatted this entire row into text. You can tell what the format is by simply looking up here in this upper bar. Were I to convert this into general, nothing would change, mostly because I haven't really done anything. However, if I hit enter, now that this is in general format, the function will run. Speaking of which, this function here is called the text function. What text does is it converts strings of numbers or stored data, such as in column G, into a text format. For instance, if we wanted to change the date listed here into text, I would do equals text, value, and then the format. There are a few different formats you could use. You could use this to say general, which you have to put in quotes, and it converts the value into the string, which is in G. Or I could use 0, which also converts that into the string in G. The difference is that in general format, it will cut off leading zeros, but in 0 format, it will not. In addition, I could set this up to print out the renewal date column I had pre-populated. The way I would do this is in the quotes, I would put date, month, and year. The reason for this is because it tells Excel how to order the dates that it's pulling from. I'm going to use column F because column F is stored as strings of text and that numerical value. So using this text function, I will convert it all into a basic text format, looking like column H. The way to do this is to tell it simply what order the dates are in. As you can see, I have this ordered as month, day, year. So I'm going to want to format it as DD, or sorry, MM, DD, YY, YY. And as you can see, formatted even by G2 or F2, it brings up the same string with the month, the day, and the year. If I were to switch these, then it would give me day, month, year. And that's how the text function works. There are a few other things you should know if you're going to be playing around with formatting, and that includes, one, how to split up rows or columns into multiple sheets or multiple rows of data, and the second is to be able to trim and combine data into single columns. The first thing I'm going to show you is trim. Trim is useful because it will actually take off spaces off of strings. For instance, if I'm using this total policy info tab, as you can see, there are spaces before and after the data. That means that if I were to put this into a table, those spaces would be there. The way I can get rid of that is with the trim function. I simply put trim, the value of the cell, hit enter. However, this was formatted as text, and I need to convert it into general to get the formula to work. Now, as you can see, if I copy and paste the value of the function, I have removed all of the spaces from that row. I'm going to actually populate that down because when I do the pivot table, I don't want any spaces in my data. And I'm going to move the header over. In addition to the trim function, you can also split up columns, and you can also combine columns. The trick to this is to highlight the data set you're going to use and go into the Data tab. From there, you can click Text to Columns, which will populate this text to column wizard. There are two different options you can select from here. You could do fixed width, which will allow you to manually put where you want to split the columns by measurement, or delimited. What delimited does is it allows for splitting of data on key symbols, or key numbers or letters. For instance, if I click the other option and use dash as a split, then it'll split my data by policy number, and by name. You can also go one tab further and even format how you're going to spit things out. I'm going to format this one as general, and this is text, and then I'll click Finish. Now, it's important to know that when you split up data like this, it will populate into the next cells over, which is why I spaced out my data by 2 columns. However, it will still split with the base column. It won't just keep that base. So when you're splitting data, make sure that you either have a copy of the base column or you do not want that base column to exist. You could also undo that with a Control-Z, but I digress. You could also use concatenate, which is the function that combines cells. For instance, that's how I created this total policy info. If I hit equals and type concatenate, as you can see, the description says join several text strings into one text string. And it'll say text 1, text 2, text 3, and on and on. What you can do is you can reference a cell, or in another cell, and another cell, and it will combine them. Now, because I didn't have any spaces or commas or anything else to put in, it just spat it out all together. However, what you can do is you can add in things in quotes into your concatenation. For instance, a comma and a space between the last name and the first name, and a space and a dash and another space before the number. That's how I created the total policy info row. But that's enough formatting. Getting into exactly how to create pivot tables. This is the part that I think you'll most use. Pivot tables are easily used to create tables and charts, which it's a lot easier to do than just formatting sets of data in base Excel. To insert a pivot table, you go to the Insert tab, and then select Pivot Table. Simple as that. I use all of the data sheet that I'm going to use because it's never harmful to have too much data to pull from. But you could also simply drag and drop and select specific ranges of data to choose from. In addition, you can choose to populate your pivot table in a new worksheet, which is the option I always choose, or the existing worksheet. If you select existing worksheet, it will populate the pivot table over your current data table, which is why I never choose that option. You could also, however, choose location for that pivot table to populate if you're using your existing worksheet. But I'm going to do a new one and click OK. That will bring you to a screen that looks like this. As you can see, we're in the Pivot Table Tools section, and we have our pivot table over here and our list of data to pull from on the right-hand side. If I click off of the pivot table, that data disappears. And to get that to reappear, simply click back onto the pivot table area. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a summary of policies that paid in January. And we're going to filter that by the different carrier options. To do that, I would make January the value. I would use the total policy info as the row label. And I would put carrier in the filter section. It's fairly self-explanatory, actually, when you drag and drop things into this area, because to filter things out through your report, you drag something into filter. To add row labels, you put something in row labels. To populate the values, you want to put it into values. And if you want column labels, then you could drag and drop something into the column area. One thing to note, though, is that it automatically chooses count for values. To change this, click on the data you're using within the field and click Value Field Settings. You can then name this however you'd like, change how you're showing values, but what's important for what we're trying to show, which is the actual value that paid for the policy in the month of January, we're going to use sum. What that function does is it will sum the total of the payment info within the row of January specified by the the column January specified by the row of the policy information. So if we change to sum, it shows the data that's in that exact area we've specified. Not only that, but I can actually filter data as well. You can select multiple data to display, or you can select all, or just Anthem policies, maybe just medical mutual policies. I'm going to show medical mutual in Fort Dearborn. And now we have a list of medical mutual and Fort Dearborn policies that paid in the month of January. But a quick question would be, which paid more, Fort Dearborn policies or, as we have specified, the medical mutual policies? A good quick way to view this would be in a chart or a table of some sort. We already have the table, but we don't have policies specified. So I'm going to show you how to create a pivot chart to show this. All you have to do is be under the Options tab in the pivot table and click Pivot Chart. As you can see, there are several different options for the pivot chart type. I think the most easy way to show this difference would be a column graph. However, you could also use a line chart or a pie chart. A pie chart might actually be easier, but we're going to start in column and click OK. As you can see, we have all of the list of the policies. We have the January information, and we can filter this out by carrier. However, this is not the best way to show what we're trying to see. We're trying to see if Medical Mutual paid more than Fort Dearborn, or if Fort Dearborn paid more than Medical Mutual. The way to change this is to put the sum of January as the axis carrier. Well, I'm sorry. The best part about pivot tables is you can just sort of move things around and play with it until it looks right. We are going to put the policy info. Here we go. And then we're going to want to put January as the value. There we go. Now, as we can see, Fort Dearborn clearly has paid more than Medical Mutual within the month of January, and that's backed up by our table up here. In addition, if I wanted to display this in a pie chart, I could right-click on the plot area, select Change Chart Type, select Pie, and click OK. It's as simple as that to change between chart types when you're using a pivot table. In addition, if I wanted to change colors and other interesting things about the table, I could right-click on the chart area and click Format Data Series to change things like that. I'm going to do Vary Colors by Slice, and I'm going to do Solid Fill. Well, not that. That's not going to work. I like to leave things as automatic, but you can also simply go into the data, right-click on it, or change things from the legend as well. Going back into the Format Data Series, we're going to leave things like this for now, but you can also change chart styles up in the top. Simply going through will change the color selection. In addition to that, you can edit things like the carrier information below and add more filters because we have the full list of data in here. I'm going to throw Coventry into the mix, and we can see that Coventry only had one payment of $1 for the month of January, so that didn't make up much of our full pie, so to speak. If I throw in Anthem, You can see that really Medical Mutual and Fort Dearborn are the main sources of income, at least for the month of January. Not only that, but I also had a column for total annual commissions. If I drag that in, then you can see the total makeup of all of the commissions and what carrier contributed what. If instead of by carrier I wanted to do this by policy, I could remove carrier, go to total policy info, make that our axis field. As you can see, we have several policies. So doing this as a pie chart might not be the best. I can right click and change chart type again to change into a column. From here, I can actually show you how to specifically change values and colors. If I right click on chart type and format plot area, I can change the fill color. Let's have the background be a solid fill and make it orange. And as you can see in the background here, the background of our plot area has changed to orange. If I wanted to change the exact row data, I would click on the major grid lines, and our menu is changed to the grid line menu. I can change the line color, the line type. I'm going to use a gradient line this time. And to do that, you can click on the color values and change them through, like orange to black to white. And it's rather difficult to see with that orange background, so let me change that. But it starts in our color and changes the gradient all the way through the table. You can also actually resize by simply dragging and clicking, like that. And we can still narrow our data down further if we go into Total Policy Info and filter to just the policies we want, say Samantha Fowler and Atkin Ron. Then we can compare their commissions. And as you can see, our grid line change is a little bit more visible. In addition, I can actually change the format of the different fields and axes. To do this, it's a bit easier if I extend it out. I double click on the axis that I want to change, and I can change the options in here. I personally like to do this payment value in intervals of 0.5. So the way I'd do that is I'd go into Number, General, make sure everything is formatted appropriately. And I'm going to choose Fixed on all of these. Our minimum value is going to be 0. Our maximum value for our chart should be 2. We're going to split this up by major units of 0.5. And the low range or our sensitivity of our data is going to be by 0.2. What that does is that splits up the way the data is shown. For instance, if I throw in a few other policies, wow, all of those paid at 1. Let's just select all to show the variation. That is all showing at 1, which is rather odd. But I think that's because we're doing annual. If we go ahead and change this to January, we should be able to see a bit of a difference in the data. Oh, because our maximum is 2, that's why. If we go back in to the chart, and change our values here to automatic, it still is only displaying that one section. I will get back to this a little bit later, but it's important to make sure that you leave enough space for everything, and that you make sure your value field setting is displaying on sum if you're trying to show different values. That was the issue. If you have any further questions about pivot tables or playing around with data to create one, please feel free to send me a message at tlevine@crnstone.com and I'd be happy to assist you. Pivot tables are very easy to use and play around with, but as I've just displayed, they can be a bit tricky. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. If there's anything else you'd like to ask, please go ahead and ask it in the chat and question section. Have a wonderful day.